The survival of the Netherlands has always depended on controlling water.
The Netherlands, they live with water.
The Netherlands is 15 times smaller than France. The country is bordered by the North Sea along 450 kilometers of coastline. 2/3 of the country are prone to flooding, and more than half is below sea level.
Even here, in the center of Amsterdam, I'm sitting here now below sea level.
To extend their territory, the Dutch have erected 22,500 kilometers of dykes between them and the water, equivalent to the length of the Great Wall of China. The most amazing example of these barriers is the ring-shaped Randstad dike, which protects Holland's 3 biggest cities, including Amsterdam.
Despite the sophistication of the system, everything in Amsterdam is constantly being monitored.
For the past few years, the city of Amsterdam and the country as a whole have been facing an even greater and more unpredictable danger: global warming and rising sea levels.
If you know that you want to change Holland and you want to live with the water, we have to come up with new technologies. And Dutch are innovative.
2 Dutch scientists have now come up with a crazy project for a North Sea wall. It is a cry for help to the rest of the world. This double dam would close the North Sea in 2 places to prevent the Netherlands from being swallowed up.
It's very difficult to say by how much and when the water will rise, but you have to be prepared for the worst.
The Dutch have been able to stay safe thanks to a veritable military arsenal. It includes the Maaslandkering, the largest dam in the world, the Oosterschedelkering, each gate of which weighs more than 480 tons, the equivalent to 2 A380 aircraft, enabling it to withstand the power of the North Sea, and the Zaan motor, which spews out tons of sand every day to reinforce the dunes. The technological prowess of these superstructures is unparalleled.
People at the water board, they can manage to bring water up and down. Same if you're a DJ, you can also tune the music. So the challenge is how to keep your water level always stable.
Since the Middle Ages, Amsterdam, the historic capital of the Netherlands, has showcased some of the strongest and innovative constructions, such as houses built on stilts. But the world's most advanced flood control weaponry is never completely immune to failure.
If it happens, then it will be, a real disaster.
But will Dutch innovations be enough to avoid it? Amsterdam, the historic capital of the Netherlands with its legendary canals, is located in a delta where sea and rivers meet. It is one of Europe's most threatened cities when it comes to rising water levels. Protecting itself from the risk of flooding is an imperative for this country, which has more than a quarter of its territory below sea level, and Amsterdam in particular. As incredible as it may seem, the center of Amsterdam is located 4 meters below sea level, while Schiphol International Airport is 6 meters below. The airport and the city only exist thanks to the dikes that surround them.
We have mounds of earth connected by dykes, upon which construction has taken place. These mounds can be relatively small, the size of a village, or much larger, home to a big city.
A dike is a man-made barrier used to regulate or hold back the surrounding water. Far from what one might think, dikes in the Netherlands are like land bases on which entire cities have been built, with streets, railway stations, and motorways. In this country, where 2/3 of the territory are below sea level, it is imperative to build on stable, raised ground. Over the centuries, a tangle of dykes has entirely shaped the territory, protecting it from water. As such, the country's three largest cities, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, are linked by a circular dike called the Randstad. This dike, invisible to the naked eye, is in the shape of a ring. This shape makes it much more robust than a dike in a straight line. Today, some 7 million people live within this ring. The economic heart of the European Union's fifth biggest economy is protected by this circular dike.
Here we are in Rotterdam, and we are on the dike. The main dike begins under the central station in Amsterdam.
The central station sits on this ring dike that starts in Amsterdam.
Here in Rotterdam, we are on the southern dike of this polder.
The dikes are the result of work carried out over centuries, and the Dutch are proud to have built their country from scratch. Plot after plot, now almost a quarter of the country's territory has been reclaimed from the sea.
The country I live in, Holland, is not a real country, but it's a fake country. It's artificial, it's man-made.
Since the early Middle Ages, the Dutch have defied nature and built an entire country on water and swamp. The most fascinating example of this battle won with the water is the city of Amsterdam. Amsterdam takes its name from the Dutch word dam, meaning dike, and the Amstel, the river that flows through it. Once a humble fishing village in the 17th century, Amsterdam became the most prosperous port in Northern Europe. The city, which was made famous by its canals, owes its prosperity to the water that serves as a route for trade. But above all, it is down to the ingenuity of its people. These canals are like knife cuts notched into the dike that forms its foundations. They allow the water to circulate. Amsterdam's canals stretch for a total of more than 100 kilometers, crossed by some 1,500 bridges that link around 90 islands. Amsterdam's canals form what is known as the Golden Curve, which gave rise to the city's nickname, the Venice of the North.
The city was built on a dike, which is like a mound of earth. Then you build on top of it and create canals all around to enable traffic to flow and to prevent flooding.
So what does that mean? That means that there somewhere is a levee, maybe 2 or 3 meters, and that behind there's a canal, and we're still pumping groundwater into that canal, from the canal to the river and from the river to the sea.
The Dutch have always known how to transform their dangerous geographical situation between sea and river into an asset for trade, because they use the water to transport their goods. But to meet demand, they needed additional land for livestock. So in 1320, they built a circular dike that would allow them to extend their territory. Furthermore, creating meadows around Amsterdam would protect the city from the risk of flooding. This very first flood protection construction is a real achievement. Although no longer visible, this 126-kilometer-long dike was built at more than 5 meters above sea level and protected an area of around 800 square kilometers, including the city of Amsterdam, an area the size of the city of New York. It is thanks to this artificially created land that the Netherlands has been able to expand and to protect its historic capital. For centuries, the city of Amsterdam has therefore been the object of much attention. Thanks to the circular dike and some constant surveillance, the Dutch have so far been able to avoid the city being flooded. But sometimes it's been a close-run thing. On the night of the 13th of January 1916, flooding rivers and high tides led to dozens of dykes being breached. The entire region around Amsterdam was flooded. But miraculously, the capital was spared. The horror at the idea of seeing this historical treasure being devastated by floods pushed the Dutch authorities to take action that transformed their territory forever. They decided to close off the North Sea inlet on the edge of which Amsterdam was built.
So it was decided to close off this branch of the North Sea. The Southern Sea was closed off by a dike, and it was then the largest dike in the world.
A huge construction project was undertaken to build this gigantic dike, 32 kilometers long and more than 7 meters high, cutting right through the North Sea. The Afsluitdijk, also known as the enclosure dam, was a technological feat for its time. This unique project confirmed the Dutch as world leaders in anti-flood technology. The dam took more than 20 years to complete. Tons of clay, concrete, and scrap metal were required to create this enclosure dam, which came down like a guillotine in the open sea. The first mission for this construction was to protect Amsterdam and its 210,000 inhabitants at the time from the risk of high tides.
Amsterdam, like all of the rest of the country, and certainly the low-lying parts, is protected by the dikes from flooding from the sea. There are smaller dikes also protecting it from the central lakes in the center of our part. So this is the basic safety that any city in the Netherlands has. So Amsterdam is part of that bigger infrastructure.
Since 1932, thanks to the Afsluitdijk, Amsterdam has been the best protected city in the Netherlands. Reassured, the Dutch then tried their luck by expanding even more. And to do this, they used a technique that dates back to antiquity: polderization. Since the 16th century, the Netherlands has expanded its territory by some 8,000 square kilometers, an area around the size of Corsica.
We've always been threatened by water, by sea, by rivers, and we have defined a kind of mechanical, a kind of machine, what Holland is, an artificial country, where we can beat the water. We push the water out and we create a dry land.
Around 1/5 of the country is built on land reclaimed from the sea and the marshes. This reclamation is known as polderization. The Romans used these techniques back in the 1st century. To polderize an area, it must first be dried out. To do this, it is surrounded by a dike. Then, with the help of windmills and now electric pumps, the water contained within the area is pumped out through canals. The water leaves behind muddy areas in which reeds or other plants are added to absorb the salt and complete the drying and desalination process. This marine land is thus transformed into arable land.
The decision to create these polders was connected actually by the projections of the demographics of the country, as well as the necessity to become independent in agricultural terms, to be self-sufficient agriculturally. So we needed new land, and we were very successful in doing so.
There are fields as far as the eye can see, covered with green grass. But behind this image of nature, each plot of land here is artificial. Under these carpets of grass, the earth lacks fertility.
Human beings have an amazing capacity to disrupt, but also to degrade and destroy entire ecosystems. You have to accept that in spite of our eco-engineering feats, no matter what we do, we'll probably never be able to create anything 100% natural.
Creating something 100% natural a fantasy? Not for the Dutch. The most incredible example of this artificial nature is the creation of Flevoland, an entire province in the suburbs of Amsterdam that is the same size as Luxembourg. Flevoland was created in 1986. It was a huge project that had been under consideration for decades and which met the Netherlands' constant need for more land for agriculture.
Between 1914 and 1918, there was a famine due to the First World War. This project came about to provide agricultural land.
This crazy project would never have seen the light of day without the enclosure dam completed in 1932. The dam created a lake, which allowed the Dutch to polderize areas of fresh water and thus create new land. But this reclaimed land is particularly vulnerable to flooding, and its inhabitants must live with that threat. The province of Flevoland is located at between 6 and 14 meters below sea level. The soil is fragile, and constant tides in the rivers make the risk of flooding a little greater every day.
Paradoxically, the cities most at risk are not exposed to the sea, but further inland. And then a city very much at risk is Lelystad, that actually is in a deep polder, in an area that used to be part of the sea, but now is an inner lake thanks to a closure with a 30-kilometer long dike.
Lelystad is just 60 kilometers from Amsterdam, and the historic capital and the new city have something in common: the fragility of the soil. Amsterdam is located on swampy soil composed of soft peat and clay. This soil is a real challenge for architects. As far back as the 17th century, they had to find a way to make the foundations of the houses, designed in the typical Flemish style, hold firm in the ground. All buildings in Amsterdam are built on piles with wooden stakes. But to reach the first stable layer of solid sand, it was necessary to drill down to a depth of more than 11 meters, the equivalent of a 4-story building.
So every house you see, you have the house, you have the stilts underneath it, is put on stilts. And for example, if you go to the center of Amsterdam, there's a big palace. And underneath that palace, there is, I think, 13,000 piles of 20 meters holding up one building. So the most dense forest of Holland is underneath one building.
This underwater forest supports houses built on cob, a mixture of clay and straw. Designed to be submerged, this traditional material is very robust as long as it is not exposed to variations between air and water. But in recent years, traditional Amsterdam homes have been facing a new challenge brought about by global warming. This time, it is no longer flooding that threatens them. It's drought, which poses a danger to their foundations. This is a new phenomenon for this northern European capital. In recent years, the city has experienced long periods of drought and heat that make the water levels in the canals fall, exposing the cob to the open air, making it dry out and crumble. Then, when the water rises during the winter, it seeps in and eats away at the foundations. The historic center of Amsterdam is now facing a new risk, that of collapse.
Holland is artificial, it's fake, and the people at the water board, they can manage to bring water up and down. Same if you're a DJ, you can also tune the music and make the rhythm and the sound and the light. Well, that's how we also work with Holland. So if we have water storage areas, then if there's too much water, we bring the water to the water storage area, and by that the water level in Amsterdam stays the same. If there's a lot of dry, we bring water from the water storage areas back into the water. So then still we have the same level. So the challenge is how to keep your water level always stable.
Controlling the water, monitoring the level, and keeping it at a distance so it doesn't engulf the country. The Dutch have been fighting against water for centuries. But there is one danger that nobody can be fully protected against: storms. Winters in the Netherlands always bring storms. The combination of very high winds and the North Sea at its highest level brings a real threat of flooding. The fear of seeing waves of icy, muddy water breaking on the coast is in everyone's minds. Every year behind the dykes, they prepare themselves for the worst. And the worst happened to the Dutch on the night of the 31st of January, 1953. During this terrifying night, the province of Zeeland on the southern coast of the North Sea was battered by one of the most terrible storms Europe has ever seen. A combination of 160 kilometers an hour winds, excessively high tides, and a powerful depression from the northwest sent the water up to an exceptional height.
Mankind has accomplished some absolutely incredible technical and technological feats. And we forget when we talk about water that water is so much more powerful.
You cannot tell it enough how the power is of the water, and you should be afraid of that.
Water shapes entire valleys and erodes everything in its path when it wants to. No matter how much technology you bring to it, it will always find a way. So it's up to you in the end not to get in its way.
The phenomenon of coastal flooding begins away from the coast. Tons of water are lifted up by gusts of wind to crash down on inhabited land. Because the Netherlands are located in a delta where rivers meet the sea, they are extremely vulnerable.
So if you think of the map of the North Sea and the wind from the north, you see that it goes into a funnel. So the water levels are pushed up, and this can lead to water levels that are 4 meters higher than the average sea level.
The wind drove a huge amount of water inland, and the water rose in the houses with incredible speed.
The water came so high that my father decided we should go on top of the roof. We know people who have saved their lives. They put out the tiles of the roof, and on the wooden construction they were floating.
In the early morning of the 1st of February 1953, the storm-stricken region of Zeeland woke up to utter devastation. The disastrous consequences of this high tide traumatized the entire country. There were more than 1,800 dead, 100,000 homeless, and 160,000 hectares of land flooded. Once again, Amsterdam was spared, but the country was forever marked. Despite the fact that these events were caused by natural phenomena, the consequences of the high water were linked to human construction. The Netherlands' ingenious network of dykes, built up over the years, broke in 89 places.
The important thing to understand is that protection is never total.
But if the Netherlands can never be totally protected, to what extent can Amsterdam be saved? After the Great Storm of 1953, the Dutch had no choice. They declared war on water. To wage this war, they set out a military strategy known as the Delta Plan. This plan described all the major works to be carried out to block the path of the water.
The fight against water is perhaps one of the major themes in the collective image that we have of the Netherlands.
Their main weapons were barrages, dams of unrivaled power and dykes that were stronger and higher than ever seen before. At every point of entry, the water would come up against the military force of these superstructures. The safety of the 18 million Dutch people who live behind them depends on it.
The most important thing was to be able to live here. First, they built the dykes to protect the fields, then they built the dykes to protect the people who lived behind them. So in 1953, they thought it was normal to spend up to 3% of GDP on these major projects.
This defense strategy took full effect in Zeeland, the region devastated by the storm of 1953. Seen from the sky, it looks like lace. The water is everywhere. To defend themselves against it, the Dutch erected some impressive dams. In 1979, a huge construction of earth and steel was created. The Oosterschedelkering, or the Eastern Scheldt Storm Surge Barrier, was the first superstructure to be built after the storm of 1953. It took 26 years for this unprecedented technological innovation to see the light of day. This 9-kilometer-long barrage, located between two islands, has 62 steel sliding doors, each weighing 480 tons. These 62 barriers, which separate the North Sea from the Eastern Scheldt River, have come down 27 times since the barrier went into operation. Each of the doors weighs the same as 15 heavy trucks, and they are lowered as soon as the swell exceeds 3 meters. On 27 occasions, they have fended off coastal surges like that seen in 1953.
It has protected our country from floods from the sea already for 2 generations. And so it will remain a very essential part of our flood defense strategy.
Once the south of the country was secured, this extraordinary plan to protect the country then turned to Amsterdam's big sister, Rotterdam, the country's economic capital. The biggest port in Europe, 80% of the city of Rotterdam is located below sea level. Rotterdam may have made its fortune from water, but at the same time it risks perishing from it too. In the north and in the south, everywhere the water could come in had to be blocked to prevent flooding. The rivers are the enemy to be fought. And the first defense is the Haringvliet, a spectacular construction that regulates the waters of the Meuse and the Rhine, the 2 rivers that flow through Rotterdam. As soon as the water level gets too high and threatens to flood the city, the 17 openings in this dam are activated and the river water is dispatched into the North Sea. This 5-kilometer-long dam also serves as a 4-lane motorway.
The budget given over to this project and the money still granted to maintain it are quite phenomenal.
Since its implementation, the Delta Plan has served as a military strategy, constantly pushing the technological limits. And its centerpiece is the most prodigious superstructure ever seen in the world. The Maaslandkering, built in the 1990s. Its purpose is to protect the city from storms. Located at the entrance to the port of Rotterdam, this mobile dam protects more than 3.5 million inhabitants, along with the commercial activity of the 8th largest port in the world. This hydraulic structure was completed in 1997, and is the largest mobile structure in the world at 420 meters long, the equivalent to the length of 4 soccer fields end to end, and 20 meters high. Its designers have planned for all eventualities. To prevent such a system from breaking in the event of a major storm, they left a slight opening between the doors when they close. This breach prevents the dam from breaking when water flows in hard and fast.
So about 3 meters or 3 meters 50 above the mean sea level, and a storm surge with a certain force, wind force 11 or 12, then it is decided to close the dam.
Twice, this unrivaled example of technological prowess has proven its effectiveness. During the storm of November 2007 and the North Sea storm in January 2018, water levels reached record levels. The authorities decided to close the dam and managed to avoid the worst.
For the people living over there at around 3.2 meters above sea level, it's very important for the dam to close in time to avoid their houses being flooded.
For Europe's largest port and the country's largest city, the daily challenge is to keep the threat as far away as possible. In order to ensure the greatest possible protection from the water, the Maaslandkering has a partner construction with which it works in tandem. The Hartelkering barrier is located a little further inland. It works like a guillotine and wasn't included in the Delta Plan. But since the 1990s, climate predictions have made it indispensable. This impressive 98-meter-long mobile dike is mounted on 3 pillars. Each of its doors is suspended at a height of 14 meters above the canal, comparable to a 5-story building. Since 1997, the closing system has been used twice, simultaneously with the Maaslandkering barrier.
But this is a very gradual process, and we monitor this very closely, how this will evolve, because safety first.
Today, the Netherlands seem to be fully protected by its anti-flood weaponry. Just like Amsterdam, it is permanently monitored to keep the threat at bay. But behind their incredible technological prowess, the Dutch live with danger every day.
They have profoundly transformed their territory, and it is very tightly controlled. The aim is to have total control over the entire system, which no longer has anything natural about it. As such, we're not looking at a natural disaster. Rather, we're looking at a system failure that is due to this vision of having total control over nature.
In this artificial country, nature is like a machine in which humans control every cog.
And living in a machine like Holland means that you have to upgrade your machine every 30, 40, 50 years. 50 years ago, we thought that we were finished for the next 500 years. And now we know that we have to upgrade it, that the levees that we have, the polders that we have, are not enough to keep Holland dry for the next century.
Innovation and ingenuity can never stop here because there are so many dangers facing the Netherlands. In addition to rising water levels, river floods and storms, another major problem that is nibbling away at the Netherlands is one of coastal erosion. This is one of the first consequences of rising sea levels. The dunes subside and then disappear, and the disappearance of these mountains of sand is endangering the land behind the coast. Indeed, the dunes are the first line of protection against high waters. They act as natural ramparts. Without them, flooding would be unavoidable. And the Dutch have come up with a unique kind of vessel to reinforce them, the Zand motor. The idea is simple. Sand is gathered from the seabed and then sprayed in a continuous stream back onto the coast. This strengthens the coastal dunes, which then protect the rest of the country. What makes the sand motor so unique is that it uses the energy of ocean currents to bring the sand to the dune and the natural movement of the tides to stabilize it. This amazing system, which is based on natural processes, does, however, have certain consequences for the environment.
It dredges the sand from the ocean floor, but the ocean floor is basin-shaped. So when you pump the sand from here, the sand on the coast collapses and falls back down to the seabed. And they keep trying to put it back here. But when you keep doing that, it keeps falling.
This process is currently being used in The Hague to protect the coastline. Some 20 million cubic meters have been pumped to create the equivalent of 256 soccer fields of dunes and beaches. This project is called the Dune Delta. The sand motor technology may eventually prove to be harmful to the country and its inhabitants. By constantly having to find solutions to the problem of living in inhospitable territory, the Dutch could end up having to leave this land. Perhaps the solution for staying safe in Amsterdam actually involves living on the water instead. The latest architectural creation is these floating houses in the Ischberg district on the outskirts of Amsterdam. This suburb is composed of 7 artificial islands and houses that float.
We see it as a technical solution, which is very safe. It has the exact same comfort and aspects as a normal house. The only thing, sometimes we call it a boat because of regulations, and sometimes we call it a house of regulations. So we think about more flexible cities. How can we use the water to be responsive, to react on everything that's happening around you, to be ready for an unexpected future?
For the moment, these floating homes are among architects' preferred means of adapting to the rising water levels that are one of the biggest challenges currently facing the country. The houses are supported by floating concrete tanks immersed in the water. The rest of the construction is made of light steel and wooden panels, which allow for a traditional layout inside. The houses are anchored to the bottom of the lake with steel mooring posts to stop them drifting. But here again, there is a flip side that must be taken into account. Behind this idyllic image of life on the water, these floating houses are already posing some ecological problems. As always, technological innovation disrupts ecosystems. These houses resting on concrete tanks make the water surface opaque. This lack of light causes aquatic life to die. Faced with this new problem, engineers and architects have had to propose new solutions, such as houses on stilts.
The most important thing is that if we start building on water, it's not architecture above the water, but it's architecture also underneath the water. We call this blue habitats. And if I go to a city, the first question they ask, what is the effect on the ecology, on the water system? So we build artificial corals underneath it. We bring enough water, light and air in it. And by that we can influence the system. That means that if you're in the middle of a river or the middle of a sea, we can create these buildings and they start to be as catalyst functions for creating new ecosystems around it.
But is this floating home solution enough to cope with the major upheavals awaiting the Netherlands? In 100 years, entire regions of the Netherlands will most likely be wiped off the map due to rising sea levels caused by melting glaciers combined with coastal erosion and land subsidence. The entire western facade of the country, as well as the inland areas to the south and west of Amsterdam, could be completely erased and submerged by water. Despite all their inventiveness and technicality, the Dutch may no longer be able to find land for shelter.
Living in such a vulnerable country, that means that if there's more water, more climate change, we probably have to leave our country. Because if we do nothing, if we just keep them as it is, if we don't make our levees higher, if we don't find solutions to be floating, then we will be the first to leave.
Float or leave. This is the dilemma caused by climate change that is facing the Dutch. Once again, they will have to come up with an answer, armed with their knowledge of water management.
There are extreme scenarios, and I also believe that then within the country we could do great things. If you think of our response and reconstruction after the Second World War, then a population can do a lot in a short time when the need is there.
And the Dutch are proving this to be true. Right now, a unique project on a gigantic scale is in development. The idea is to build a wall to hold back the sea. It involves a truly colossal dam that would close the North Sea in 2 places. 2 gigantic walls would have to be built in the middle of the sea. The first, some 500 kilometers long, would connect the Scottish coast with Norway. The second, 150 kilometers long, would extend from the southern tip of the UK to the coast of Brittany. This outlandish project would protect 25 million people from the risk of submersion. For the time being, this project is not the subject of a political and economic debate on a European level. It is an alarm bell being rung by Dutch scientists to raise awareness about government inaction on climate change. But once again, the impact of such a construction would be immense. This dam, on an unimaginable scale, would transform the North Sea into a freshwater lake. Such extensive modifications of an existing ecosystem would irreversibly disturb the surrounding ocean currents, including the famous Gulf Stream. It is this ocean current that ensures mild winters across Europe. Without the Gulf Stream, every country in Europe, including the Netherlands, might then experience winters like those enjoyed in Siberia.
The problem is that when you build a wall, you think you're protected. But it's always the same. You carry on expanding, creating, and building behind the wall because you think it's protecting you. And that's what risk management is about. You try to resist and protect yourself. But if the wall or the dike were to be breached, well, you can imagine the scale of the disaster that would ensue.
The risk of a technical failure is huge. One only has to imagine the amount of water that would be held back by these 2 dams. And if a breach were to occur, the flooding of the entire coastline would be a catastrophe for which no one could ever be prepared.
Now, evacuation of, let's say, the region of Rotterdam, The Hague, our capital, and Amsterdam, within 24 hours, it's impossible. Millions of people evacuate out of that area. So the evacuation plan is also to get people to higher ground. So our evacuation is more a vertical evacuation than a horizontal evacuation.
And the first region that might risk being wiped off the map is Flevoland, the suburb of Amsterdam. This immense polder, this land reclaimed from the sea, is today the area most at risk. 400,000 people live and work here, a population comparable to that of Manchester or Miami. It is absolutely necessary to ensure its safety.
It's not a technical problem, it's a societal choice that must be made. And that's the biggest problem for us now. We know that sea levels are going to rise by 2 or 3 meters, but we don't know when. We have to make the right political decisions now, which won't harm us in future. This is our duty.
The example of Flevoland, the newest and most endangered province, is leading the Dutch to change their attitudes. At a time of climate change, a new environmental consciousness is emerging, encouraging them to give up on the idea of more growth.
Today's society values the natural system and nature much more, and is hence in favor of leaving it as it is.
We have to listen to nature, we have to live with water, and we have to follow nature, and then see what we can do with that. Only fight against it, that doesn't work anymore. We should understand what the water is doing, what nature is doing, and then make the best of it.
The time has come to return artificially created land to the sea. Depolderization is the new choice of the Dutch authorities to protect the country from danger. Reclaiming land, this practice that has been carried out for centuries, has, under the effect of climate change, had a negative effect. Hiding behind a dike, there is a growing awareness of the risks.
But I also think that on schools they don't teach the students enough how this country works. Because if you would talk to just somebody here on the street, they say, yes, we know we have polders and we know we live below sea level, but they don't know that it is an active system. If you're not pumping water out, we will drown.
Avoiding ending up underwater has been the challenge facing the Dutch since the Middle Ages, with their incredible engineers and the most sophisticated anti-flood systems in the world. Today, this country, whose coastlines look like lace spread across the North Sea, finds itself at a turning point for its very survival. Global warming is causing sea levels to rise relentlessly. So how could we have imagined that the storm of 1953, as violent as it was, could today be 3 times more destructive, and that next time it could well reach Amsterdam? Will the Maasvlakte-Kering and the Hartelkering barriers have to close more often in the coming years? Will the Oosterschedelkering, which some call the 8th wonder of the world, with its 35-meter-high pillars weighing 18,000 tons each, still be able to hold back a sudden rise in the North Sea? If the water rises more than 10 meters, what will become of the Afsluitdijk, the enclosure dam created at the beginning of the 20th century, which was considered to be a model of safety? 1 degree, 2, or even 3.5? How much temperatures will rise is the great unknown. The entire system underpinning this country could collapse like a series of dominoes if the temperature rises. In the end, there is no technological prowess that can ever withstand the full force of nature.
New York City, symbol of America's power and in danger. A mosaic of islands in a bay along the Atlantic Ocean, the city is barely above sea level. Global warming has put the city at risk of devastating floods. By the end of the century, the sea level will have risen by 2 meters, and every 5 years, a cataclysmic hurricane could strike.
By the year 2080 or so, it will get very, very serious.
It's a recent threat. Up until now, New York has only experienced a powerful hurricane once a century. There was no reason for flood protection. The city grew at breakneck speed, building ever higher to become the quintessential skyscraper city.
There's no doubt that New York City is living with mistakes that were made in the past.
Since the end of the 20th century, the threat has accelerated. 1938, 1972, 2011 with Hurricane Irene. And then, just a year later, New York was struck with the worst natural disaster in its history.
When they tell you to evacuate, you need to evacuate.
In 2012, Hurricane Sandy slammed New York with violent winds reaching up to 150 kilometers an hour, bringing the city to a standstill and claiming dozens of lives.
That was the highest on the historical record since New York City was founded.
It definitely looked like an apocalyptic scene from, a movie.
Today, the danger is real. New Yorkers face a huge threat. 400,000 of them live in flood zones.
If the vast majority of the scientific community is anywhere close to right, then we have a problem we need to solve.
To save the city, engineers are dreaming up amazing technology, like a giant deployable wall that folds out around Manhattan.
It has to come up to 16.5 feet. If you do that, you know that it's going to protect any of the water from coming into the city.
An anti-flooding balloon has been designed for tunnels and even a waterproof building.
So we asked ourselves the question immediately after the hurricane, is it still safe to live here? The answer is, of course, yes.
Another amazing project, oyster beds implanted on seawalls to slow down powerful waves.
It's realistic, it's studied, it's very highly engineered as a project.
How did New York in just a few centuries grow into a megalopolis with extravagant architecture? How is the Big Apple preparing for the worst? Will New York be saved, or will it wind up underwater? This is the extraordinary adventure of a remarkable city that could soon be destroyed at the hand of what created it, water. New York was born 400 years ago. Located on the east coast of America, along the Atlantic Ocean, in a naturally protected harbor, the city is actually a bay strewn with islands. The most famous of them is Manhattan. At the time, it was 47 square kilometers. Back then, Manhattan was nothing like the current exuberant city it's now known as, the epitome of the American dream. A constantly buzzing, bustling city with 8.5 million inhabitants and hundreds of skyscrapers. In reality, this steel and concrete jungle has sprung up on what, not so long ago, was a real Garden of Eden.
I love to go to Times Square and there's all the lights and all the people and all the craziness, and to just try and imagine that there was a stream there and a pond and maybe a black bear walking by.
This is Manhattan today. And here's how it looked 4 centuries ago, covered in forest, interspersed with marshes and streams. A few hundred Native Americans were its only inhabitants, hunting and fishing to survive. But around 1620, Dutch settlers came to the wild island. They bought it for about $25. Despite the region's occasionally severe weather, the colonists settled on Lower Manhattan. One has to admit, the location is incredibly strategic. For starters, the harbor is extremely easy to access from the Atlantic Ocean. What's more, the 2 rivers, the Hudson to the west and the East River, offer gateways to countless commercial hubs in the eastern United States.
New York's growth is linked to the fact that its port was exceptionally located, a protected harbour that quickly made it one of the largest ports in North America.
Lower Manhattan urbanized quickly. The population tripled in a mere 20 years. And soon, the rest of the island was developed, but in a less orderly fashion.
The founders of the town realized there'd be no way to resist its fate. Immigrants were arriving, and the city was exploding, so to speak.
At the turn of the 19th century, New York shifted into gear to keep up with its ambitions. However, it didn't take into account the storms it suffered about once every 100 years. And as it developed, it left itself vulnerable to floods. The stroke of genius that allowed the city to build more buildings? Behold, the grid plan. It partitioned Manhattan into 12 avenues running north to south and 155 streets running east to west, dividing the city into blocks that could be built up in a way that made the most of space. The problem was that at the time, Manhattan was strewn with hundreds of hills and streams, a topography that was hardly compatible with building a big city. The answer? Clear the work surface. New Yorkers flattened some of the hills, channeled the rivers, and dried out the swamps, leaving room for streets, buildings, and before long, skyscrapers.
And in fact, it was criticized at the time. They said, what are you doing? You're planning a city that can hold the population of China, right? But they said, no, we need this grid. And so, the grid is the perfect Cartesian expression, right? Across the landscape. It didn't care where the streams were, it didn't care where the hills were, it didn't care anything about the marshlands or the coastal edge.
The only goal at the time was to welcome as many people as possible onto the land which is vulnerable because it's so close to sea level. With global warming, the shift in the island's topography is problematic because the entire flow of water has been modified.
The flows of rainwater to the sea or to the river will follow both above ground and below ground the topographies that had existed there before. So you get floods locally because of that pathway for rainwater. And some of it means that the underground streams are gorged with water when there's a major rainstorm.
Especially since New Yorkers can't count on their drainage system to absorb the overflow of rain. 150 years ago, the choice was made to develop a combined system that funneled both rainwater and sewage into the same pipes.
At that time, people designed these systems the best they knew. And there was nothing in the historic record that would indicate that they would have to build for such extreme events.
The upshot is that during storms, the sewers overflow.
So essentially, fecal matter is floating around in the Hudson and in the Atlantic, and they have to close the beaches because it's not healthy for a couple of days until Mother Nature flushes it out.
In fact, as it developed, New York made no allowance for the fact it sat on the waterfront and consequently could be flooded. Until now, the city hasn't really suffered, since in 400 years, there's only been one major storm per century. But 2012 was an irrevocable turning point. A massive hurricane struck New York.
When they tell you to evacuate, you need to evacuate.
October 29th, 2012. Hurricane Sandy struck the city full force. Gigantic waves surged through the streets of Manhattan.
So the storm surge that came in was large and wide. And also, it came at the same time as the high tide. And so we had a little bit more than 4 meters of storm surge coming into lower Manhattan, plus the waves, particularly on the ocean front. The waves would add to that.
That was the highest on the historical record since New York City was founded.
48 dead, entire neighborhoods destroyed, the subway at a standstill. New York panicked.
What's going on? I don't know what's going on. It's a hurricane. What the hell is this?
At 9:15 p.m., a power plant exploded, grinding the city to a halt.
The entire city went black, completely in the middle of the night. And you could still see the lights from Times Square, which is up on 42nd Street, but everything south of about 30th Street was completely black. And of course, nobody knew at that time how long the power was going to be out or what had happened. But the power ended up being out in most parts for almost a week.
New York City denied its existence underwater pretty much. And that was a reminder. Sandy really brought this home. We are a city on the ocean.
The entire city is in danger because New York is surrounded by 900 kilometers of coastline. What's more, it lies only 40 centimeters above sea level, and in some spots of Manhattan, not even 12. Geographically speaking, this makes the city extremely vulnerable to climate change. Today, the city faces two problems. First, the rising sea level.
The upper range for New York City is by the end of the century, by about 2100, that sea level rise could be 2 meters up here. And that makes a big difference when you have a city that has so much invested on its waterfront.
The second problem. In the future, hurricanes will be increasingly violent and will occur much more frequently.
That will be in the future occurring every few years instead of once in 100 years. We can have a Sandy once in 100 years or so, but if that Sandy elevation flooding happens every few years, that is, of course, unsustainable.
So how does New York plan to protect itself? What infrastructures could prevent this extraordinary city from disappearing under the sea?
It's a very tough moment, but I think it's time to start asking some of these harder questions.
Since the hurricane in 2012, the entire city has been preparing for battle.
You need stress or an event such as a hurricane to make sure that the city will be ready for the next time.
The City of New York launched an unprecedented design competition, investing nearly $1 billion.
It was a very simple functional question. How do we protect ourselves? And then it was a site-specific question. How can New York improve itself by protecting itself?
If the vast majority of the scientific community is anywhere close to right, then we have a problem we need to solve.
Architects and engineers from all over the world set to work to find solutions, what we call resilience.
I think of it like a boxer, right? You have two people fighting, somebody gets a big hit. Your ability to take the hit and not fall down is called resistance. It's how much you resist the disturbance. But if you do fall down, if you get knocked down, how fast do you get back up? That's resilience.
The first matter of urgency, protect Lower Manhattan. The zone was hit particularly hard by Sandy. Wall Street even had to shut down for 2 days, resulting in huge financial losses. That something like this should happen again is simply out of the question.
So it's simply the finances, the shutting down of the city, just the logistics of what it means for the heart of so much capital and so much banking and so much business would be shut down would have a huge impact on the world.
One of the brilliant ideas that won the competition is a U-shaped protective barrier stretching 12 kilometers around Lower Manhattan. It's called the Big U. The barrier is not a simple concrete wall. It takes on different forms to fit each neighborhood's needs.
If you're in the east side of Manhattan, there's much more open space. And you say, maybe in this case, a levee makes much more sense. It's cheaper. It works with the park next to it. And so you start to look at all the menu of different options. And so it changes. The entire length is a combination of the best selected pieces of flood protection.
In some spots, it will be an artificially created berm. There'll also be levees. In other areas, hills will be created to accentuate the topography and protect it.
The flood protection needs to come up to a certain elevation, right? So you know that in 2050, if there's a storm like Sandy, it has to be 16.5 feet above sea level. So even if it's a wall, if it's a gate, if it's a berm or a levee, it has to come up to 16.5 feet. If you do that, you know that it's going to protect any of the water from coming into the city.
The Big U's flagship project, a deployable wall to provide a barrier against waves. It will be attached here to the underside of the FDR, an elevated highway that runs along the East River.
So imagine above this is the FDR, right? Technically, this works in a very simple way. When the storm is coming, say 24 hours before, someone comes along and they turn these down. What they would do is they'd have a motor attached to the base, and it goes zzzz, and then slowly this thing comes down.
The wall, 3 meters high and 2 kilometers long, will swing down to block the water and prevent the waves from surging into the city. The rest of the time, the wall is flipped up so the ground space can be used recreationally.
The ground is where people want to be, and having a wall in the middle of that would destroy the relationship to the water and the use of the space on the ground. So by having something that could actually flip up, actually means that you keep the best part of the city while also making it fully functional.
The work is set to begin in 2019. Total cost of the project, $335 million. However, the barrier may not be enough. Because back when the city was being built, certain mistakes were made. Mistakes that New York pays a high price for in today's changing climate. By the mid-19th century, New York had exploded into a metropolis. With its extraordinary demographic growth, Manhattan was no longer enough. The neighboring districts began to develop: Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. Since 1898, these 5 boroughs have formed the modern city of New York. They're connected by an extensive system of tunnels and bridges. One of the most well-known is the Brooklyn Bridge, which links Brooklyn to Manhattan. It was the first steel wire suspension bridge, and for years was the longest in the world, 1,830 meters. New York became the city of superlatives. Buildings kept going up and up. The Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Skyscrapers sprang from the ground like mushrooms, breaking records left and right.
In the late 1920s, a rather comical competition developed between the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building, which ended up winning with its antenna that was taller than the one its opponent unexpectedly surprised the city with.
Today, New York boasts the most skyscrapers in the world after Hong Kong. But these towering giants have a direct impact on floods. Like in 1938, when a hurricane paralyzed the metropolis for days. Still, New Yorkers didn't learn their lesson.
We've decided to build these big buildings and then use, gas and coal-powered fuel to heat the buildings, right? Which is leading to climate change, right? It's putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is leading to climate change, which is making the sea level rise, which is then flooding parts of the city. So there's no doubt if you were to start again, you would build the city in a different way, in a way that would be more compatible with the nature of the place.
In 400 years, Manhattan, which started out as virgin territory, morphed into an urban giant. 97% of its ground is covered in concrete. Today, this urbanization has become problematic.
The soil is like a huge sponge that can absorb the rainwater and the snow melt, but now you've limited it. And so you actually make more floods happen because of that, right? It becomes flashier because the rain falls down and it has nowhere to go, right? It can't go down into the ground anymore. It can't go up into the vegetation because you've cleared all the trees, can't go back into the atmosphere, so all it can do is flood. And that's why, just small rains, you get floods all over New York.
Luckily, New York had natural barriers that offered protection from storms. Except that, as it developed, almost every single one of them was destroyed. John F. Kennedy International Airport, 49 million passengers transit through here each year. JFK is located in the southeast of the city on Jamaica Bay. The bay stretches 100 square kilometers and is separated from the ocean by the Rockaway Peninsula. Originally, it was one of the East Coast's most beautiful nature reserves, an expanse of water strewn with a dozen marshy islets.
It's a paradise within the city. So when you go there, it's often hard to believe that you are still in New York City.
And yet this is where, in the late 40s, the airport runways were built right on top of the marshes which served to reduce wave energy.
Essentially, it became a place that was, over the years, it had been a dumping ground, and then it gradually became integrated into the rest of the city, but it had the issues of what had once been a wasteland. Of course, flat wetlands are often considered prime sites for creating airports, which need vast expanses of flat territory.
To dry out the marshlands, dredgers suck sand up from the bottom of the bay through huge pipes. The sand is then mixed with cement and dumped into the marshlands to make the ground more solid. The result? The vast majority of marshland in the bay has been paved over. To top it off, 4 water treatment plants have also been built here. They too contribute to polluting the bay and destroying the marshlands. And yet the marshes would have been a great help when Superstorm Sandy slammed the region with its gigantic waves.
Jamaica Bay, I think, because so much of its edges had been hardened, drained, developed, everything became basically paved over in a massive way. I think that definitely, things would have been different had it been a quite absorptive marsh platform.
Because marshlands act like barriers during storms. When waves come in from the ocean, wetlands act like sponges that absorb water and store it. This not only slows waves down, it also makes them smaller. But it's not just the marshlands in Jamaica Bay that have been destroyed. In reality, over 80% of the marshes throughout the entire city have been filled in. This is the case with Central Park, for example, New York's famous green lung. Here too, the wetlands were massively drained to build a vast artificial park. So how can the city make up for the absence of natural barriers? What if a tiny creature, just a few centimeters long, could save the city? A small shellfish that's become the new hero in the world war against climate change. In the southwest of the city is Staten Island, one of New York's 5 boroughs. The island was ravaged by Hurricane Sandy. 24 people lost their lives to the waves. But here, it's impossible to build a wall.
In Staten Island, you're dealing with a very, very residential fabric. And building a wall with such a low density wouldn't make sense, both from a risk reduction standpoint, from an economic standpoint.
And so another amazing project, which also won the city's design competition, consists of establishing oyster beds in the bay. These small shellfish can reduce wave energy. Actually, it's a little-known fact, but until the 19th century, New York was the oyster capital of the world.
New York City had an immense natural oyster production. Today we talk about New York as the Big Apple. But at the turn of the 19th century, we could easily have called it the Big Oyster. That's how characteristic oysters were to the economy here.
You know, in New York, you have like hot dog and food carts, so you can get a hot dog on every street corner. Back then, it used to be oyster carts. So people will stop walking in the street to buy oysters and have oysters on the street.
But today, with pollution and overfishing, oysters have disappeared from New York Bay. And yet, the shellfish played a primordial role, particularly in Staten Island.
You know that there was a place on the south shore of Staten Island, there was an oyster reef, and you can see in the geologic record that it used to protect the shore. And then once that reef got reduced because of overfishing, then the shore became more vulnerable to overwash events and storm surge.
Why not look to the past for inspiration and recreate these famous oyster reefs? The problem is, the water in the bay is still polluted. There's no way oysters could grow on their own. They need help. These huge artificial breakwaters, built about 3 meters high out of stone, will be coated in a special ecological concrete and planted with oysters, which in time will colonize the entire structure.
Oysters come together in oyster reefs. It looks like coral reefs, basically. So they come together, they build those natural reefs. When one oyster dies, there is another one coming on top of it, and so those reefs keep building up.
The 9 breakwaters, 300 meters off the coast and stretching over 1 kilometer, will eventually function like this. As powerful waves crash over the top of the breakwaters, the structure's porosity will absorb the water and lessen the wave's energy. Coastal damage is therefore reduced.
The oyster projects are as much to do with the healthy ecology of the region as with storm protection. So I think that it's true that any kind of planting or wetlands or islands or oyster reefs, all of that contributes to the reduction of the storm energy before it hits the coast. But in the long haul, the oysters are also really good as a symbol of the health of the estuary.
Because these tiny mollusks have an amazing property. Each day, a single oyster can filter 200 liters of water all by itself. The water in these 2 containers is very dirty. Oysters have been placed in the one on the right. The result is astounding. After just a few hours, the water is nearly transparent. New York Bay could soon be cleaned in the same way.
It's a snowball effect, and the more oysters you put, the better the water quality gets, and the more oysters will be able to survive in the future.
The first breakwaters are scheduled for late 2018. But beware of food poisoning. New York's fin de clair won't be fit to appear on the menu until 2050. It's an ambitious project, no doubt, but is it enough to save the city? Because New York thought it was indestructible and has been quite reckless over the centuries. For instance, the city has actually expanded right into the water. And in storms, the people living in these zones are obviously the first to be affected. The figure is astonishing. In 400 years, Manhattan has grown 20% larger. When colonists arrived, it was 47 square meters. At the turn of the 19th century, the city began to spill over onto the rivers surrounding it. A century and a half later, the encroachment continued. Today, Manhattan boasts 12 square kilometers of additional land.
And in part, that was for real estate purposes. You know, people wanted more land. It's amazing for the Dutch and the early British. They actually found it more economical to build out than to build north, right? They so because before cars you had to walk everywhere you went, so you want to live close to everything, right? So they made this really compact city, and so they would fill out. And then later on in time, people needed space for industrial uses, they needed space for transportation, they needed space for housing.
Here's how the new land was created, and the island was able to expand over time.
So most of these new lands built around the edge are built with landfill that sometimes is from the demolition of hills in other parts of the city. So if somebody was removing rock to create the Empire State Building, that had to go someplace. So there would be some clever person who would think, aha, I'll buy this from you. I'm going to put it over here in the water. You dump in soil, and voila, you have new land. And you've also solved somebody else's problem who didn't know what to do with the rock that they were cutting out.
The most striking example in this quid pro quo is Battery Park City. An extension built entirely from scratch around 1980 on the Hudson River. 37 hectares, 16 skyscrapers, a community of businesses and luxury housing.
Battery Park City is the most dramatic change recently in terms of the shoreline of New York.
To understand this amazing engineering feat, we need to go back to the 60s. The World Trade Center was under construction and tons of rock was being excavated. Builders chose the cheapest way to get rid of it, simply toss it into the Hudson. The rubble created a landfill site in the water. A few years later, the additional surface would provide a foundation for the construction of Battery Park City. Of course, this new land is the most susceptible to the effects of climate change, and here's why. In color, the areas added to Manhattan over time. And in red, the priority evacuation zones in case of storm. They correspond exactly to where the river was 4 centuries ago. During a hurricane, water simply returns to its original place.
We thought that those places were fine to live in, and we now see that, in fact, with a combination of things, that climate-driven sea level rise, as well as more increased and stronger storms, those places are actually at risk.
And yet, even if the risks have been well known for 30-odd years, building on the waterfront continues. Are New Yorkers playing Russian roulette?
Yeah, the Russian roulette comes into play once we knew that sea level rise is going to happen. And that was foolish and short-sighted because theoretically the knowledge was already available. And that still applies today. We are still putting new buildings and assets on the waterfront instead of thinking 50, 100, 200 years ahead in terms of where we place our future assets.
At 11,000 euros per square meter on the waterfront, the temptation to continue building in these zones is tremendous. What if the answer were to build totally waterproof skyscrapers? Overlooking the East River, behold the American Copper Building. It has just been completed and is New York's first waterproof building. The building stands right in the flood zone, and for good reason.
If you were to take a map of Manhattan in about the 1920s or 1930s, and you put this building on that map, you would see that this building is sitting in the river. And we knew that this lot sat on landfill when we bought it. So we knew that the soil underneath this lot was not going to support a foundation.
The building is supported by enormous pillars sunk into the bedrock 90 meters down. Inside, a classic luxury skyscraper. A gym with breathtaking view, upscale apartments, and gaming room overlooking the river. Purchased post-Sandy, the building was designed so that residents could survive as long as possible without electricity. Because during Sandy, the electrical equipment in countless skyscrapers in Lower Manhattan got flooded.
The
biggest lasting impact was people living without electricity. So no elevators, no flushing toilets, no water being pumped up to the 20th, 30th, 50th floor, no lights on these higher floors. So we asked ourselves the question immediately after the hurricane, will people still want to live on the waterfront? Is it still safe to live here? The answer is, of course, yes.
But how to ensure that this skyscraper built on the water does not flood? First, an ultra-sophisticated drainage system was created around the foundations of the two towers. During storms, the water is collected and channeled through a network of underground pipes to huge reservoirs that can hold over 100,000 litres of water. Once water levels have dropped back to normal, the reservoirs are emptied into the East River. But the technique may not be enough. So a backup sump system has been installed in the basement to make the building truly waterproof.
Most buildings don't have a whole sump system in the basement, let alone 10 or 12 of these sump systems to be able to deal with a whole volume of water in the basement. So these pumps can deal with that, and we have a primary pump and a secondary pump in every single location to make sure that there's always a backup in the event that one pump fails.
In the event of a general power outage, the builders have thought of everything. But to do so, they had to sacrifice the best apartment, the one that would have gone for the highest price.
Level 48.
Here we are on the top floor, where, in theory, the grand luxury suite is located. But instead, it's the home of 5 powerful backup generators, able to furnish 2 megawatts of electricity, enough to power the entire skyscraper for a week in the event of a storm.
In the event that happens, we have refrigerators in everyone's apartments, charging outlets in everyone's apartments, all the elevators, the domestic water pumps, the gas pumps, basic heat, all of those things are covered on this system.
A system that, in theory, will protect the people living in this building. But what about all the other New Yorkers? How can the public network also be waterproofed? Given the risks, the city has made the first move. New infrastructures have already been built, notably to protect the transportation network. Because Hurricane Sandy dealt a huge blow to the city's subway and tunnels. Thousands of cubic meters of salt water gushed into the corridors. The subway shut down for 7 days.
The subway system has all the entrances into the subway, some of which are in low parts of the city, and so that was a place where the water could get in through the entrances into the stations and from the stations into the tunnels. So many of the stations were flooded, many of the tunnels were flooded, and that damaged a lot of the electrical systems and the signal systems.
The subways weren't working, so everybody tried to drive their car into Manhattan, so there was just, all across the city, there was this massive traffic jam and nobody could get anywhere.
A nightmare for New Yorkers, since 5.5 million people take the subway each day.
That is the Achilles heel of New York City. When the subway goes down, the city goes down.
So how to protect the subway from floods? How to prevent water from entering the 3,600 entrances at risk? A dozen high-tech solutions have been invented. Already, subway entrances can be covered with these sheets of waterproof fabric. Custom tailored and spooled in a container perpendicular to the entrance steps, the sheets can be unfurled in just 5 to 10 minutes to cover the entire staircase opening. They've been installed mainly in Lower Manhattan. The elevators are protected by watertight steel bars that are manually put in place. Inside the subway itself, massive hermetic custom-built doors, like submarine hatches, will be able to keep water out.
It's a part of a toolbox of different tools to keep the subway system running for maybe another 50 or maybe to the end of the century.
And the final weak link, the road tunnels that run between New York's boroughs. When they're flooded, the entire city is paralyzed.
New York's tunnels, by definition, are below ground level, and some of them are below sea level, underneath the bay. The tunnel between Manhattan and Brooklyn, and the tunnel between Manhattan and New Jersey on the other side, those were built a long time ago, so they're not watertight.
Here's the solution. Monumental steel doors weighing 25 tons, measuring 9 meters long and 4 meters tall. 8 of them are already in place. They've been designed to withstand a rise in sea level 1.2 meters higher than Sandy's waves. But in light of the extreme violence of storms, they may not be enough.
If you cover up all the entrances, you still can't be sure that every of those entrances will work 100%. So you still want to impede the flow in the tunnels if something goes wrong at the surface.
Engineers have got a lot of imagination. They've devised a giant inflatable balloon. 10 meters long and 5 meters in diameter, its volume is equal to 132 cubic meters, the equivalent of a large residential pool. It can be inflated in just 30 minutes. Its material is ultra-resistant, similar to the kind used for spacesuits. Once it's completely inflated and pressurized, the balloon will fully plug the tunnel, preventing water from seeping in.
It's a bit like airbags in cars. An inflatable device that can blow up and contain the water. It's a brilliant idea because it doesn't require the creation of any heavy infrastructure.
Despite all these solutions on offer, it may already be too late. For many, it would be suicidal to continue living on the waterfront. If the sea level were to rise by 2 meters, Manhattan would be underwater. What if the only true solution was to simply leave the island? Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn in southeastern New York. 600,000 graves on a plot of 2 square kilometers. Altitude 67 meters above sea level.
They have wonderful vistas over the whole harbor. But it's low-density living of the dead.
Could this be the solution? Leave the waterfront and move to the heights of the city. New York is fortunate to possess several areas that are high up. It's just that many of them are cemeteries, like here in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, and in Queens.
So we would have to switch to living in the dead, or they are neighborhoods that are relatively low density. So you would have to develop a new zoning for those areas so you can allow new high-rise buildings to be erected there.
The idea sounds crazy, but given the extremely serious risks, experts are convinced it's the only way people will be able to continue living in New York.
Yeah, many people think I'm crazy, but that doesn't bother me because I think they are crazy if they want to build on the waterfront. So we will have a few more Sandys, and more people will come to appreciate that a forward-looking few with a little bit of foresight will be actually more good than just craziness.
For 400 years, New York has been developing in an increasingly grandiose, increasingly over-the-top way, completely ignoring the fact it was surrounded by water. Today, the element that created it could very well be its downfall. So the world's giant no longer has a choice: drown or reinvent itself. The answers, each one more ingenious than the last, will have to surpass the countless economic interests. That is the cost at which New York will be saved.
is a city that should never have existed. Built on a fault line, it has always suffered from violent earthquakes and typhoons. And yet, with over 37 million inhabitants, it's the largest and most populated city in the world. Dynamic and modern, yet its millions of people live with a constant threat of earthquakes.
The next one could very well happen now, for instance.
The danger is invisible. No one knows when or where it may strike.
If Tokyo's hit, all of Japan goes down.
Stubborn and brave, the Japanese capital has adapted to the danger. Tokyo has put its ingenuity to work to develop the most earthquake-resistant structures in the world.
We have to be faster than the earthquakes to find ways to fight them. It's a race between us and earthquakes.
Since the city was founded, tireless builders have defied fate. As early as the 7th century, they mastered amazing techniques to protect their buildings and the city's inhabitants.
We build floors so they're very flexible and so they can move.
Despite the ground shaking on a regular basis, Tokyo has become one of the world's most powerful capitals. When quakes strike, its buildings sway but don't collapse. How is such a feat possible?
We've made flexible buildings that don't fight the movement. It's the story of the oak tree and the reed. The tree, no. The reed, yes.
On an island subject to natural disasters, Tokyo must also cope with typhoons and diluvian rains. Engineers have come up with a unique system to save their city.
We have pumps that can evacuate 200 cubic meters of water. In other words, the equivalent of a 25-meter pool every second.
But is Japanese ingenuity prepared to face the large-scale disaster looming on the horizon? A massive earthquake, the big one, which happens about once every 100 years.
There's more than a 70% chance that within the next 30 years, we'll be hit with a huge earthquake.
How have engineers managed to build the most modern city in the world on land that is constantly shifting? What new dangers does Tokyo face? How is the city preparing for the worst? Will Tokyo be able to withstand the wrath of the earth once more? Journey to the land of the rising sun. Chronicle of a megalopolis facing disaster. Japan's capital is unlike any other city in the world. Located on the main island of the Japanese archipelago, the urban area of Tokyo spans an expanse of 50 kilometers. Literally, Tokyo means Eastern Capital. It's the most populated city in the world. The Japanese capital is the hypercenter of a megalopolis that stretches 1,200 kilometers. Over 105 million people, in other words, 80% of the Japanese population, live on this strip of land sandwiched between the mountains and the sea. The city of Tokyo is a miracle issued from the determination of its inhabitants, who after each disaster have always picked themselves up and kept forging ahead. Because living in Tokyo means learning to live with the danger of natural disasters.
For us Japanese, it's part of our culture. In a way, we're used to calamity.
Every year, over 1 million earthquakes rock the earth, 100,000 of which can actually be felt by people. In Japan, about a dozen large earthquakes happen each year. One legend has it the large island rests on a giant fish that thrashes about every once in a while. Japan's high seismic activity is due to the fact it lies at the junction of 4 major tectonic plates: the Pacific, North American, Eurasian, and Philippine.
We know we have a sword of Damocles over our heads, or rather under our feet. Everyone knows it could happen, but we live with it.
The Pacific plate off the coast of Tokyo shifts westward 8 centimeters a year. This phenomenon, called subduction, is responsible for the Earth's most violent quakes. The plates come into collision and generate rising tension. One day, the friction unleashes a force that triggers a huge vibration. Scenes such as this are commonplace for the inhabitants of Tokyo. And things aren't about to change, because in the region of Tokyo, the number of earthquakes just keeps rising, and they can be very intense.
Intensity lets us accurately measure how, in every region, each place was shaken.
In Japan, seismic intensity is measured on the Shindo scale. It describes the degree of shaking at a given point on the Earth's surface. The higher the level, the greater the damage. At 4 on the Shindo scale, people are frightened. Most people asleep wake up. At 5, people find it difficult to move. Many unreinforced walls collapse. At 6, certain buildings lose their roof tiles and their windows break. At 7, walls collapse. The island nation suffers 20% of the most violent earthquakes on the planet. The city of Tokyo is built on a plain, a particularly vulnerable zone that rests on water-saturated soil with very low density.
As you see on this map, the red shows where earthquakes are biggest. Blue zones correspond to areas that don't feel too many quakes. It's ironic, but the places where it's easiest to build and live are the same areas that are most susceptible to earthquakes.
Nevertheless, this is where the Japanese decided to build their capital. The terrain is vast and flat. It also has sea access. But in fact, the Japanese couldn't have found a worse place to build their city. And yet. Formerly called Edo, Tokyo was originally a small fishing village that grew and gained in importance over the centuries. Most of its people lived in traditional, inexpensive wooden houses. With each earthquake, the small structures and their heavy thatched roofs would collapse. Tokyoites would tirelessly rebuild as they awaited the next quake. Still, Tokyo's builders would always put their ingenuity to the test. It was out of the question that important buildings like palaces or temples should collapse every time the earth shook. Japan's Buddhist temples are among the oldest wooden structures in the world. They are distinctive in that they've been built in a way that offers amazing resistance to the frequent earthquakes that rock the country. Starting back in the 7th century with pagodas, builders sought to erect increasingly taller structures and increasingly more solid ones. To do so, they perfected an ingenious technique.
The big wooden temples and shrines don't have foundations. Buildings are often set on enormous columns, then set on large stones that are barely sunk into the ground. Globally speaking, that's what defines construction in Japan for the past 1,500 years.
The central pillar of the pagoda is only attached at the top level. It's independent on the lower levels. Thanks to the central pillar, any distortion resulting from an earthquake is spread evenly over the 5 levels, ensuring the shock isn't concentrated in one spot where it could cause a rupture.
We've made flexible buildings that don't fight the movement. It's the story of the oak tree and the reed. The tree, no, the reed, yes. The building moves, like me, to absorb the shock.
This type of building has never collapsed. We can affirm that the system is very efficient.
Solid structures that can flex and sway. Once again, this was the principle used to build Edo Castle in the 15th century. To protect the palace, constructors built over 6 kilometers of moats and walls. Made of granite blocks weighing several tons and fit together like a puzzle, The wall does a remarkable job of resisting tremors. Once the shaking stops, the blocks settle back into their original spots. These jewels of Tokyo architecture have proven they can resist earthquakes. On the other hand, the traditional organization of the city with its small streets and wooden houses turned out to be unadapted. And Tokyo would pay a high price. Today, Tokyo is an ultra-modern city with a giant forest of skyscrapers to prove it. It's hard to imagine that over the course of the 20th century, Japan's capital suffered two major disasters that reduced it to rubble. September 1st, 1923, 11:58 a.m. The ground shakes. The Kanto earthquake strikes. 10,000 people are killed as buildings collapse. But the worst is yet to come. In the neighborhoods of wooden houses, over 200 fires break out simultaneously in different spots when thousands of braziers are lit to cook the midday meal.
And in 1923, an enormous fire razed a good part of the city. It burned people who couldn't get away because they were stuck in the rubble. People sought shelter along the rivers and were burned there.
Things went from bad to worse. A tsunami washed over the plain and dealt the final blow. Entire districts were ravaged by fire and flood. The death toll was mind-boggling. Over 200,000 victims, and 2 million people were left homeless. Damage was considerable. Over 700,000 houses were destroyed. The traditional disorderly urbanization of Tokyo, with its flimsy wooden structures and narrow streets, was blamed for the thousands of deaths. Practically 2/3 of the city had to be rebuilt.
It turns out that the few structures back then that were made out of reinforced concrete were still standing.
The Japanese government embarked on a vast rebuilding campaign to make concrete structures that wouldn't collapse or burn in the next earthquake. But 22 years later, Tokyo was destroyed once more. On the night of March 9 to 10th, 1945, 335 U.S. bombers dropped over 1,700 tons of bombs on Tokyo. It was one of the deadliest air raids ever, causing over 100,000 deaths. A third of the city was annihilated.
It would take Japan about 10 years to get the economic industrial machine back in motion and rebuild its cities. Because Tokyo wasn't the only city destroyed. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were as well. So the population of Tokyo started growing again in the 50s. And it hasn't stopped since. It's still growing today.
The Japanese had no choice but to rebuild their capital as quickly and inexpensively as they could. The city got down to business. Urban motorways, tunnels, vast building complexes. But turning the town into a concrete jungle didn't come without risk. In fact, it even had heavy consequences on the future of the city. Since concrete is watertight, it prevents water from soaking into the ground. The upshot, the sewers fill to the brim and water spills over into the streets, triggering new disasters. Because let's remember that several rivers flow through Tokyo and its region, and some areas of the capital are even built below sea level. Not to mention the fact the archipelago is regularly doused by torrential downpours and typhoons. Typhoons are tropical cyclones, one of the most powerful atmospheric phenomena that exist. The winds are devastating, and the rains torrential, leading to flooding, rock slides, and landslides. Typhoon season is mainly in the fall. On average, 26 typhoons form in the northwestern Pacific Ocean each year, and more than a dozen of these curve toward Japan.
By its nature, a typhoon already means heavy rains. But in Japan, twice a year you have the rainy season. If typhoon rains combine with those of the rainy season, it means extremely heavy precipitation that leads to mudslides and makes rivers overflow. And this causes a great deal of damage.
We also have highly concentrated rainstorms called guerrilla rains. These are basically torrential downpours. Because of the sudden rainfall, water levels rise quickly and the region is flooded.
To deal with the threat, the city has built the biggest anti-flood system in the world. Located about 30 kilometers north of Tokyo in the city of Saitama, it was designed to control and regulate river levels. Beneath the feet of these Japanese retirees lies a colossal structure that limits flood damage. The government-backed project cost over $2 billion.
The purpose of this facility is to regulate water flow to cope with the threat of flooding. We've built this system here to clear excess water. The system is made of underground tunnels, containment silos with pressure adjustment tanks, and pumps that can clear water quickly upstream toward the Edo River.
5 containment silos, 65 meters deep and 32 meters in diameter, have been built. They're connected by a tunnel over 6 kilometers long. During floods, excess water from the 5 rivers is caught and stored before getting pumped over into a huge tank. Here it is. Its dimensions are awe-inspiring. 177 meters long, 78 meters wide, and 18 meters tall. The structure is supported by 59 pillars. An underground cathedral that stores water to keep it from flooding the city.
Our pumps can clear 50 cubic meters of water, in other words 50 tons, per second. And we've got 4 of them. So in all, we can clear 200 tons of water per second.
The anti-flooding system can drain the equivalent of a 25-meter pool in 1 second. The water then gets pumped into the Edo River. Tokyo is pummeled by torrential rains and typhoons. The pumps work flat out and clear millions of cubic meters of water. The system has proven to be effective. Every time, Tokyo has been saved from flooding. But the brave city remains at risk to its #1 threat, earthquakes. Today, Tokyo is the city of superlatives. Over time, by combining tradition and modernity, the city has developed its might and forged a resolutely modern image. Tokyo boasts a wide variety of architectural styles, an entanglement of infrastructure, railroads, highways, tunnels, and skyscrapers. Opulence is everywhere. A vibrant city pulsating with energy, Tokyo is also a constantly changing urban landscape. Builders have one obsession: ensuring building durability while respecting Japan's anti-earthquake norms, the strictest in the world. The symbol of the city and its know-how is the Tokyo Sky Tree, a futuristic broadcasting tower standing 634 meters tall. The Tokyo Sky Tree was designed and built on the same principle as the 7th century pagodas. It's a flexible structure with a central pillar that can bend and shift during tremors. The movement does not impact the different levels of the building, which remain independent.
The sky tree is inspired by this. The heart of the shaft is very solid. The elevator is located right at the center. The floors where the people can move about are relatively flexible metal bars. The different levels move independently. It works like a damper or shock absorber against the wind and tremors.
The sky tree respects the essence of anti-earthquake structures to a T. It sways so that it won't break. But this system is not adapted to every building. In Tokyo, each type of structure has its own anti-earthquake system. For lower structures like housing complexes, Japanese ingenuity resides in the basement. They place large rubber cushions called earthquake isolators beneath the buildings. By separating the ground from the building, these devices absorb the shock from earthquakes. Efficient and simple, the system has become prevalent throughout the city. And yet, it is far from sufficient for the entire megalopolis. Due to real estate pressure, Tokyo has no choice but to build taller and taller buildings. But during an earthquake, a building's height is a decisive factor.
There are buildings of all sizes. They range from low buildings to skyscrapers. When there's an earthquake, what varies greatly is the oscillation period. In other words, the time it takes the building to shift from left to right, then back left again. The lower the building, the shorter the period. The taller the building, the longer the period. When the building oscillates, it's like waving a fishing rod. The tip of the rod moves the greatest distance.
What are the techniques builders have contrived in order to build higher on unstable ground? There's a whole art to building a skyscraper in an earthquake zone. The Mori real estate complex is the perfect illustration. With its 238 meters of concrete, steel, and glass, Mori Tower looms high over the Roppongi district, 53 stories, 6 basements. Its dimensions make your head spin, but the edifice is remarkably flexible when it comes to earthquakes. Its secret is hidden in its floors.
We're on the 52nd floor. This is where we find the shaking alleviation system, also called oil dampers.
In a more compact form, this sort of damper is also used in cars and high-speed trains to reduce shocks.
During an earthquake, the floors flex and move. While this movement is happening, the metal bars move from side to side. And this is where, thanks to the oil dampers, the movement gets absorbed. The valve moves from right to left, and the resistance of the oil slows the movement down and absorbs the shock of the earthquake.
The viscosity of the hydraulic oil enclosed inside the large pistons absorbs the shock waves. On either side of the damper, a special steel element absorbs horizontal stress and dissipates the energy. In the Mori Tower, there are 356 dampers like this, distributed among the different floors. The system is versatile and can absorb both small and large tremors.
This is the first building to incorporate dampers. They're the biggest ones currently available. They weigh 200 tons.
In this simulation, on the right is a classic structure without an anti-earthquake system. On the left, the Mori Tower with its anti-earthquake system. For the average building, we can see that the oscillation period, in other words, the left to right movement of the building, is much greater. The Mori Tower moves less, and on top of this, it stabilizes faster, reducing the amount of pressure on the tower's foundations. The entire complex is closely monitored from the control center located in the basement of the tower. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, the building and its oscillations are scrutinized.
The building is outfitted with 5 accelerometers. We analyze the data from the accelerometers, and this lets us monitor tremors and the movement on each floor. We use the information to make efficient decisions after an earthquake. It lets us determine exactly where we should begin inspecting.
Today, the majority of Tokyo's large complexes and strategic buildings are equipped with sensors that analyze, record, and communicate the state of their walls, floors, and foundations. Besides offices, the Mori complex contains housing, and to satisfy residents, a new challenge had to be met: a huge rooftop garden on one of the buildings. An immense weight that could in no way compromise the solidity of the building. Their idea was to adapt the system of seismic isolators. The big rubber cushions are now used to hold up a garden.
Above this slab of concrete, there are 80 centimeters of soil, which allows us to have an actual garden. Here, there are about 40 rubber isolators that can bear the weight of the 3,650-ton garden. What's special about them is they are attached vertically and can move horizontally. We use modern tools to measure the movement, but to complement our measurements, we also use a primitive system, a simple needle that shows the tremors.
The scratches on this plate are evidence of the garden's movement and the instability of Tokyo's ground. Using the principle of energy dissipation, architects and engineers have demonstrated even more inventiveness. For instance, instead of being a handicap, a weight positioned above a building can actually help counter the effects of earthquakes. It's the principle of the pendulum. A mass weighing several tons is added to the top of a building. Like a pendulum, the mass opposes the structure's movements and dissipates the energy, which stabilizes the tower.
When the building moves, thanks to inertia, the weight placed up top absorbs the movement and limits distortion in the rest of the building. With a weight placed on top, when it moves to this side, it holds back in this direction and in the other direction. It's an efficient anti-earthquake method.
It turns out this type of damper works very well and can reduce the swaying of a building by 30 to 40%. It is becoming a general feature of new buildings. But what about old ones? Because although many new structures continue to be built in Tokyo, the city must also worry about adapting its older buildings to new seismic norms. In the district of Shinjuku, where Tokyo's first skyscrapers went up, the technological challenge consists of increasing the resistance of existing buildings without touching their structure. The solution: incorporating cross-bracing into the buildings, steel X-shaped structures.
We add cross structures to the walls. Then, when the building moves, the structures stretch and compress to absorb the shock. The building moves, of course, but in a limited manner. Without any resistance, the building would deform, whereas with the system, the tremors are quickly slowed. It's more reassuring for the people inside, and it limits the amount of damage sustained by the building.
For the past 30 years, Tokyo has deployed gems of inventivity to prepare itself for earthquakes. But until the late 2000s, it was impossible to know exactly how the structure would react in case of a major earthquake. Unfortunately, a dramatic event would truly put them to the test. March 11th, 2011, 2:46 p.m. Once again, the ground begins to shake in Tokyo.
I was at my desk, and my students were sitting beside me at their computers. Everything began moving. One of the students happened to have a camera handy, and he started filming.
An even stronger tremor had just occurred 380 kilometers away off the northeast coast of the country.
First of all, there was an impact, and the building began to shake. I knew we were dealing with a very powerful earthquake.
I told myself something very bad was happening.
Dubbed the Tohoku earthquake, for the name of the province closest to its epicenter, the quake was the most powerful Japan had ever experienced. The skyscrapers in Tokyo swayed for many long minutes, sometimes at an amplitude of 1 meter. On that day, in the basement of Mori Tower, operators observed the building's movements in real time. The red cursor reproduced the building's oscillations down to the very millimeter. Forward and backward, left to right, Mori Tower moved only 32.7 centimeters.
Up on the top floor of the tower, there's a restaurant. Well, thanks to the dampers, not a single bottle of wine was spilled.
Architects, engineers, and employees all witnessed the proper functioning of Mori Tower's earthquake-resistant systems. But in the north of the country, the situation was even worse. Off the Pacific coast, the earthquake displaced a large volume of water. A series of waves with large periods spread, provoking a tsunami. The wave loomed about 15 meters high and devastated the province of Fukushima. The death toll was dreadful. Over 18,000 people lost their lives. The exceptionally powerful tsunami caused the worst nuclear disaster of all time, the explosion of the Fukushima power plant. Further south, Tokyo once more managed to overcome the ordeal. The Japanese capital proved itself to be the most earthquake-prepared city in the world. But though its buildings stood tall, its inhabitants were left shaken.
Every system in Tokyo and the city's entire infrastructure shut down. There was no more transportation. Everything was blocked for 10 to 15 hours. A city of 40 million, and everything was stopped.
Transport, electricity, communications. The city was paralyzed. There's no question of ever letting this happen again, because an even greater danger potentially looms ahead for Tokyo, a mega earthquake even more devastating than those before. They call it the big one.
Look at this book. The Cataclysm of Tokyo is coming tomorrow. Tokyo's megaquake is a sure thing. Everyone says it's going to happen.
There's more than a 70% chance that within the next 30 years we'll be hit by a massive earthquake.
If the epicenter of the next earthquake touches Tokyo, that means it will affect 1/3 of the Japanese population. 1/3 of the country's inhabitants live here. It will affect 1/3 of Japan's population. The headquarters of every major company will be affected.
If Tokyo is hit, all of Japan will go down.
According to predictions, when the famous big one hits, between 1 and 2 million Tokyoites will be left homeless. Today, to prepare for the disaster, authorities have outlined major prevention plans. They've chosen to focus their efforts on observation and earthquake detection. Today, everything is in place to alert the population as quickly as possible.
When there's an earthquake out in the ocean, our sensors pick up the waves from the tremor.
An entire underwater observation network is in place off the shore of Japan. It helps determine the epicenter and the magnitude of the quake. A recorder at the bottom of the sea constantly monitors changes in pressure. An acoustic liaison then transmits the data to a buoy anchored on the water's surface. To be treated, the data is then beamed to a satellite which sounds the alarm.
The information is sent to phone service providers and to every media agency, such as the NHK.
People are alerted about the earthquake via their cell phones or television.
We warn people beforehand. If there's a warning, they must go and seek shelter.
The alarm has gone off. Now it's a matter of evacuating calmly and respecting the rules.
We imagine there would be 2 million people in the streets, and we simulate their evacuation. We have a highly accurate model of the city that can be analyzed with a complex program. The calculated study lets us evaluate at-risk zones and areas of congestion where people won't be able to get through. We can make calculations for the entire city of Tokyo.
Based on this data, certain buildings in every neighborhood of Tokyo have been designated as shelters in the event of disaster. These earthquake-resistant structures are called refuge towers. In the Roppongi district, Mori Tower is one of these emergency shelters.
If you live in an earthquake-resistant building, instructions are to stay put. But for tourists, shoppers, or people who live in the vicinity, they can come here. This is a safe building that can be used as a shelter, in keeping with an agreement made with the neighborhood.
Large stocks of food, water, blankets, mattresses, and first aid kits are stored in the basement of the tower.
We have provisions for 5,000 refugees. There's enough water, food, and first aid products to last 3 days.
Impressive, yet insufficient. For 1,700,000 people would still find themselves on the street with no place to go. Tokyo is working to create more shelters. What's even worse, if the big one does hit, an entire residential district in the northwest of Tokyo would find itself in grave danger. This area, called the Banana, consists essentially of traditional wooden homes.
In terms of traditional wooden structures, their ability to withstand earthquakes is limited, and that worries us.
For the Kanto earthquake, this type of wooden neighborhood caught fire. The consequences were disastrous. Unfortunately, a tragedy of this sort could very likely happen again.
Since the streets are so narrow, firefighters would have a lot of trouble getting in.
A program to fireproof the homes in the area as much as possible is underway. Some of the alleys are supposed to be widened to provide easier access for firefighters and ambulances. But homeowners are attached to their residences and like their neighborhood the way it is.
It's very difficult to establish new buildings in Tokyo. You see, all those old structures, all we'd need to do is just knock them down and build skyscrapers instead. But since people live in them, if just one person is opposed to it, then we can't. There are a lot of people who want to stay in the low buildings they've always known. So it's very hard to make things change quickly.
If the big one hits the Tokyo region, the bill would amount to 700 billion euros. The estimation sends chills down authorities' spines. Currently, they're trying to come up with new solutions to protect the city and reduce the economic impact.
Today, we're being asked to construct buildings that won't get damaged by major earthquakes and won't need to be evacuated. So we need to make advances in research and development to be able to meet people's expectations. For that, we're carrying out several experiments.
To obtain buildings that are even more solid, constructors are turning to building materials. And a small revolution is underway in the field. Recently, a French company has developed an innovative material that meets earthquake-resistant requirements. Here, in the National Building Research Institute, the capacities of the material are being tested.
Traditional concrete is made of sand, gravel, cement, and water. This new concrete is made of a powder that's equivalent to cement and a binder that iron fibers can be mixed directly into. Very fine iron fibers.
Life-size components can be tested using this impressive machinery. Here, a foundation block is being assessed. An actuator on top of the structure applies pressure equivalent to the weight of the building onto the block. On each side, two other actuators simulate a horizontal tremor. Behind it, hundreds of sensors record the pressure on the concrete. On the right, the block coated with fibered concrete suffers very little damage. On the left, the unreinforced block breaks. This new material will allow existing buildings to be renovated in a way that gives them greater flexibility and improves their quality to resist over time. Builders have already shown an interest.
Today, the renovation market is bigger than the reconstruction market. And I think this trend is only going to accelerate. Before, our approach was to rebuild every 30 to 50 years. But nowadays, we're thinking more in the long term and more about the environment. That's the trend.
In the future, Japan's capital city fully intends to maintain its role as an influential city and major economic power on the world scale. But like most industrialized cities today, it is currently being threatened by pollution and global warming. Today, Tokyo must face up to an insidious danger, an invisible enemy, but one that is very present. The city suffers from a phenomenon called the heat island effect, and its skyscrapers are to blame. Heat given off by cars and factories is trapped by tall buildings, causing a localized greenhouse effect.
There's been an increase in the number of days experiencing intense heat, and the same is true for tropical nights, where the temperature remains above 25 degrees. We've observed this increase over the long term.
In Tokyo, the temperature has increased 4 degrees in the past 100 years, more than in any other capital in the world. This computer model shows heat distribution. Green corresponds to lower temperatures, red shows where temperatures are highest. The loss of green spaces and increase in number of buildings seem to be the culprit. To fight this new threat, Tokyo no longer has a choice. Tomorrow, the capital must shift into ecological gear and place its bets on green spaces. Green spaces that retain water, which lowers the ambient temperature when it evaporates. With more air and more parks and green spaces in the overpopulated residential zones, Tokyo hopes for better protection against the heat. A natural urban evolution that could also safeguard the city from a danger it considered to be a thing of the past: flooding. Because another consequence of global warming is the considerable rise in precipitation.
We're actually imagining the worst-case scenario. We've anticipated that by the end of the century, precipitation could double.
At that point, the city would no longer be protected, and it would find itself underwater once again. Even the gigantic flood protection structure in Saitama would no longer be enough to clear the excess water. Engineers at the complex are concerned.
When we look at the data from the past 30 years for over 500 millimeters of rainfall per hour, we realize that, according to statistics, it's constantly on the rise.
Yet once again, the greening of the city seems to be a solution.
With more greenery, we can avoid guerrilla rains. These happen when temperatures are elevated locally. What's more, water will be absorbed better. And that, in turn, improves the environment. We need greenery. That much is clear.
Especially since in the city, public parks offer the best protection in the event of earthquakes. The transformation that Japan's capital has undergone in 100 years is simply amazing. Every time disaster struck, Tokyo has risen from the ashes. Just like its skyscrapers, Tokyo bends but doesn't break. In the future, like the reed, the city's inhabitants will continue to demonstrate humility and ingenuity. At this rate, Tokyo will be saved. Venice is a town that should never have existed. With its 124 islands, innumerable bridges, and its 176 canals built in the middle of a gigantic swamp, La Serenissima is an example of the boldness of the human spirit and its capacity to tame nature.
In my view, there are many beautiful towns in the world, and then there's Venice.
Every year, over 30 million tourists come to admire the palaces along the Grand Canal. True superstructures of their times, they were built using techniques found nowhere else in the world. And if La Serenissima seems to float upon the water, it's because, in fact, Venice is an upside-down forest, built on 10 million posts driven into the mud. It defies all the laws of architecture. But man has drastically changed the lagoon of Venice. Industrialization, ground subsidence, huge increase in the number of motorboats. The 20th century has put the city of the Doges in jeopardy.
This environment that remained unchanged for thousands of years has been destroyed in 30. It's an absolute and total disaster.
Because of global warming and the rising water levels, Venice more and more frequently literally has its feet in the water. So much so that many people think that the city of the Doges will eventually disappear.
It is Venice's destiny to be submerged, that's for sure.
So to save Venice, some incredible ideas have come to light. One especially, the MOSE project, is a totally unique system of barriers designed to block the high tides that threaten to engulf the town.
We are creating one of the biggest work sites in the world. Obviously, it's a huge challenge for us.
How did men master the lagoon and build on it one of the most extraordinary towns in the world? What are the dangers that threaten the city of the Doges? Will Venice be saved? Or will it end up at the bottom of the sea like the mythical city of Atlantis? This is the amazing adventure of Venice, a unique city, but a city that is disappearing. The story of Venice began more than 1,000 years ago in the middle of a vast stretch of water in the north of Italy on the Adriatic coast. This is the lagoon, 50 kilometers long and 10 wide. It's made up of brackish water, sand, and mud. In short, it was a place that was hostile to human presence and of no interest to anyone. But this all changed in the 5th century, when Europe was set ablaze by hordes of barbarians. People living on the coast sought refuge in the lagoon.
The lagoon provided natural defenses. It was very difficult for enemies to sail their boats and find their way. Only the people living there knew where the canals were, so they had no need for walls to protect them. That was a great advantage.
The first paradox is that the Venetians, who would later conquer the world, began their story as refugees in the middle of nowhere with no drinking water. To build their first houses, they had to use whatever came to hand.
We have a few pictures that help us to form an idea of what the Rialto Island might have been like. Rialto was the center of town, with thatched wooden huts.
The first buildings on the ancient site of Venice were in the most stable areas of ground. For example, Rialto comes from Rivo Alto, which was a high, solid bank. Dorso d'Oro, the name comes from the fact that it was a more solid piece of land. The early town was built on places like that.
But that is still a long way from La Serenissima that we know today. It wasn't until a few hundred years later that the little wooden huts were replaced by the impressive Rialto Bridge and the palaces that surround it. The first Venetians lived on small islands separated by water. Each one was a little village designed on the same lines. A square, dwellings all around it, and in the middle, the church.
That explains why we have so many churches and small squares. They were the centers of the ancient micro-villages.
And through the centuries, these islands were linked by improvised bridges, often built on the slant. But during the 7th century, the Venetians started to be short of space. The solution was to build new, artificial areas of land on the water. But building on the bed of the lagoon was anything but easy. The bottom is composed of sediment and mud, and a lot of currents flow through it. In short, ground that was moving all the time.
Here, even from a geological viewpoint, we are between sea and land. The factors are discontinuous. On the one hand, the rivers bring us sand from dry land. That forms a certain type of ground. Where there are reeds, the ground is made of peat, which has quite a different density. Venice itself was born on this multitude of geological strata on very varied type and solidity, and that caused problems. Today, when we see a church tower leaning over, we know it's because it's standing on several different strata. So the tower tips sideways.
The church towers of Venice lean, but they don't collapse. So, what tour de force did the Venetians dream up? How did they manage to make the ground firmer? The builder's secret was ordinary wooden piles. Hundreds of thousands of them were driven into the bed of the lagoon. And miraculously, the builders discovered beneath the sand a layer of caranto, or clay. It lay at a depth of 3 to 8 meters below sea level. The piles had to go down far enough to be driven into the clay to stabilize the ground.
Stabilizing the ground meant marking out the limits of a certain zone with piles. If I take some piles and I drive them into the mud and then soak it all with water, the ground between the piles will compact and stay more solid than the ground that's outside the perimeter. It's held in place by the piles which stop it being washed out. That's the theory of ground stabilization.
That's how the Venetians created artificial areas on which the town could grow, with sand from the lagoon held in by wooden piles. And the builders made another stunning discovery. Wood driven into the mud doesn't deteriorate.
It's the poles that are underneath the buildings in the mud, is that they're permanently in oxygen-free environment, so none of the microbes that would normally decay wood can get into them.
The wood undergoes a process of mineralization. It becomes as hard as stone and can remain intact for centuries.
The most famous Venetian monuments were born on land consolidated in this way. St. Mark's Square with its bell tower that alone rests on 100,000 piles. The foundations of the Rialto Bridge, 12,000 piles. And even more impressive, the imposing Basilica La Salute, built entirely of marble, even more than 1 million piles. Mind-boggling figures.
Today there are 8 to 10 wooden piles per square metre. The town was created on these piles. You might even say it's an upside-down forest. The piles fulfil the function of roots, and there are an incredible number of them.
It's estimated that in all, 10 million piles were driven into the sands of the lagoon, the equivalent of 1/3 of the Landes forest. They're mainly oak and larch that are reputed to be very strong and were brought from nearby coasts. To stabilize their ground and to bear the weight of the palaces, the Venetians spared no expense.
A study shows that the foundations account for half the cost of the building. The other half goes to the superstructure of the palaces. This means that the submerged part costs as much as the part above the water.
The town's 400 palaces all rest on these unique foundations. Built from the 11th century onwards, they're the true superstructures of their time. To make these palaces last in an unstable and moving environment, the builders called upon all their genius because they faced a triple challenge. To protect the buildings from the saltwater tides, to build the lightest possible structures on sandy ground, and to take into account the movements of the lagoon bed. This is the brilliant idea they came up with. On the piles, the Venetian architects placed a first stratum of wooden flatbeds. Then there were several layers of bricks, on top of which the builders had the idea of laying a special white stone imported from the Dalmatian coast, Istrian stone. This was the first line of defense against the movement of the tides.
That deals with the interface between the water and the air. That resists an infinitely long time because it's not permeable to the salty water.
Resistant and impermeable, Istrian stone served as a protective wall. It easily stands up against the comings and goings of the salt water. The height of the stone layer was calculated in function of the height of the tides, and therefore it prevented the water from reaching the load-bearing walls that were made of bricks and were much lighter. The rule of the time was, do not build above 3 floors.
They understood when they were building that they couldn't make it too heavy because they knew that it was all relatively fresh mud in geological terms that still compacts and causes subsidence.
Slender columns and large windows. Through their concern for weight, the architects created a unique style that was elegant and like lacework, the typical Venetian style. All they had to do now was find the way for the building to adapt to the moving ground of the lagoon.
The movements of the ground and of the water are variable, so the buildings couldn't be rigid.
Here too, the Venetians found shrewd solutions using the materials that they had locally, in particular lime mortar. It was used for building brick walls. Its advantage over cement was that while it was used like cement, it remained supple.
Lime was probably the most important material because it's adaptable. It's not rigid like cement, it can adapt. The aim was always to build, create what they had in mind, but something that could move over time.
Second example, the floors between the levels. They were made of wood, a material that is flexible and that can transform. And to ensure the flexibility of the walls and floors, the builders came up with another trick.
The beams were rested on the walls, but in such a way that they could move.
Flexible, supple, and adaptable, the Venetian building is like a living organism that changes shape according to the whims of the unstable foundations. Today, the palaces bear the stigmata of time. Some balconies are distorted. Sometimes fissures appear inside the buildings.
There has been a bit of subsidence. Some facades have twisted and leaned a little. But no palace in Venice has ever collapsed.
Venetian engineers designed their buildings so well that they can even absorb the impact of earthquakes, which are common in the region.
I remember my father-in-law telling me about when there was the earthquake in Friuli in the 1970-something, and Venice felt the shocks of that very strongly. And where we live, there's very tall, big arched windows, you know, with lead holding the panes of glass. And he said that the windows just moved like the sails of a boat and then came back in place. Not one of those little panes cracked and fell out.
Every palace has a well in its courtyard. The ingenious Venetian architects solved the freshwater problem with the invention of a sophisticated system for collecting rainwater. The water runs through these small holes into a tank where it's filtered through very fine sand. The clean water finally runs into a cistern from where it can be drawn off.
The idea was also to recuperate rainwater from the gutters on the roofs to fill the wells in the squares. It was really a very ingenious system that you don't find anywhere else in the world. And those wells were still functioning in Venice up to the beginning of the 20th century.
The wells feature in all the squares in the town. The architects dug 900 in all. At the end of the 15th century, 170,000 people were living in Venice, more than there ever have been since. La Serenissima was then at her peak. Thanks to her powerful fleet, built in the town's arsenal, Venice dominated the Mediterranean. From Tunis to Beirut, the city of the Doges was the only colonial power of the Middle Ages. Venice was like a fish in water.
We have documents from chroniclers and ancient historians who say that water must be protected because it's our most precious community property. This is the reason that there were lagoon specialists and canal specialists.
That was the challenge to the Venetian magistrates, to preserve the lagoon and the water surrounding their town. But towards the end of the 15th century, the authorities made a frightening discovery. Their beautiful fish was about to be suffocated by the sand. How could this have happened? What massive works would have to be undertaken to combat the silting up? How would the Venetians of the 15th century save Venice? The danger came from the rivers that flowed into the lagoon. It was beginning to get silted up with the sediment that the rivers always carried along.
The canals were getting too shallow for the bigger ships that, were important for Venice as a trading empire, and also for its military expansion. It needed to be able to have the ships come and go with the, with their soldiers and mariners, etc.
But this should be very dangerous for the city, survival itself, because then this could be a possibility for the enemy of Venice to attack the city from inland.
How would the Venetians cope with this whim of nature? In the course of long debates in the Palace of the Doges, two visions of the town's future were in opposition.
The people believed that the life of the city should evolve along the lines of how the lagoon was changing. So if the lagoon was silting up, then Venice should think of a future for itself and transition to agriculture, for example, because, they discovered rice. I think they already knew about corn. And then there were other people in the city that said, no, we're very good at sailing. We need to maintain Venice as a maritime republic, and therefore we need to do things to stop the lagoon from silting up.
In the end, it was those in favor of water who carried the day. The idea of the Grand Canal turned into a field of corn was unthinkable. The water had to be saved at all costs, and to do that, they had a wild idea: to reroute the Sile and Brenta rivers so that they would empty their sediment outside the lagoon. They were about to achieve an amazing feat: to dig 300 kilometers of new canals with 15th century tools, gigantic works which would take 100 years.
From that time, the lagoon is no more, let's say, really natural anymore, because the present shape of the lagoon is the result of a big effort that men that live in that area put to keep the lagoon in the same shape as it is.
Thanks to these major works, the Venetians managed to preserve the maritime identity of their town. But the water that the Venetians wanted so much to save ended up by turning against them dramatically. Because other, even more serious problems were lying in wait for the city of the Doges. The subsidence of the bed of the lagoon on the one hand and the rise in the water level on the other made a dangerous combination. How were the Venetians going to deal with this new threat? What unheard of technical exploits would they have to accomplish? Today, La Serenissima still stands proud of the water. But the lagoon has changed. Cars, trains, and even airplanes were further added to the maritime traffic, which increased tenfold. And there would soon be factories, a refinery, a power station, and a shipyard. With the 20th century, Venice joined the modern world. And it was the lagoon that paid the price.
We're seeing the drainage of vast areas of the lagoon in order to build industrial zones. The port of Marghera is an example of man's intervention. The drying out means the cancellation, even the annihilation of the aquatic environment.
Built from 1917 onwards, the industrial area and the roads to the airport have taken up 1/10 of the service area of the lagoon. But that isn't all. To facilitate the movements of the great oil tankers, the entry to the Malamocco Inlet was widened up to 900 meters. And a new canal was dug right in the middle of the lagoon.
Instead of the ships following the natural path of the channel, which was quite convoluted, they dug this straight highway across the lagoon, very wide and very deep.
It's just like a motorway that drains much too much water towards Venice and threatens the city of the Doges.
The water no longer spreads out in the same way. The natural canals are disturbed by the tanker's channel that absorbs all the currents. It's a hydraulic disaster. The ancient natural environment has been destroyed in just 30 years.
And that isn't all. To satisfy the needs of industry, 8,000 wells were dug to pump water from the water table, which is just under the foundations of Venice. In the 1950s, up to 40,000 cubic meters of water were drawn every day.
This generates decrease of the pressure.
By pumping, we reduce the pressure in the layers of sand. And when the pressure goes down in such a special and fragile soil as there is in Venice, the geological strata are compacted, with the result that the ground subsides.
It's that right now we call it subsidence, land subsidence.
The result was that Venice sank 15 centimeters in only 30 years. The lagoon, mistreated in this way, would eventually avenge itself on the Venetians, and the town itself paid the price. On November 4th, 1966, a particularly powerful high tide caused the water to rise almost 2 meters above sea level. It was the worst flood that the Venetians had ever known.
The water started to rise, and when it should have started to go down, after about 2 hours, it didn't. Quite the opposite. It just kept rising. Communications were cut off. We had no radio, telephone, or electricity. We were really frightened that day.
80% of the town was flooded. St. Mark's Square was under 120 centimeters of water for 30 hours. The tanks of fuel oil and diesel overflowed and polluted the town. But in all this misfortune, there was one piece of luck. Not one person was killed. But nearly 5,000 people found themselves homeless that day.
The Venetians and the whole world understood that day that if you attack a natural system, the system will fight back.
Among the first measures taken was that they stopped pumping from the water table. But the damage had been done. The 13 centimeters lost would never be recuperated. And a further threat was imminent: global warming and the rise in sea levels. This caused the water in the canals to rise 10 centimeters. In all, Venice lost 23 centimeters. The figure can be seen on the facades today.
The area that was most vulnerable is the one that is green today. It indicates the rising and falling of the tides. It's not the king tides that do most damage to the town. It's the everyday tides. The water comes and goes continuously.
Nowadays, with every tide, salt water reaches the brick walls. an upheaval that challenges the precautions taken by the architects of the past. The Istrian stone that formed the impermeable foundations of the palaces is no longer of any use as a protective ring.
The water's always against the brickwork, and the bricks are very permeable, and the water evaporates from the bricks, leaving behind the salts, which crystallize. And as salts crystallize, they expand in volume 12 times, and that is a very kind of slow way of, you can say, exploding brickwork.
The salt water also attacks the lime mortar. As a result, the bricks fall out and the structure as a whole is weakened. To reinforce them, these iron barriers are springing up in the town's canals. The owners have to pay the costs of restoration, but the town council can't make them do it. Today, a third of Venetian palaces are damaged and need renovating. But the daily tides are not solely responsible for the damage. Motorboats are the real problem. Their movements create extra waves, not only on the surface, but also deep down.
The coming and going of boats is very bad for the walls. With its propellers, a boat creates extra movement in the water which erodes the walls. And once the wall is eroded, the waves even attack the ground. As you can see, boats go past every minute. It's their number and their frequency that put a wall at risk.
The water seeps into the cracks, jeopardizing the whole structure of the building. It even gets to the compacted earth between the piles, foundations that were designed over 1,000 years ago. Today, they are in danger too. To limit the damage, Venice has imposed a speed limit of 5 kilometers an hour on all the Vaqué-Marti using the canals. What's more, huge liners come into the lagoon every day and unload their hordes of tourists.
These big ships move huge volumes of water, that's Archimedes' principle. There's still a volume equivalent to the volume of the ships that gets moved. And when they're in the Giudecca Canal, in all the lateral, narrow little canals, the water level rises and then goes down again with the passage of each ship. It's like an extra tidal excursion, but not a tide that comes and goes over 6 hours like the regular tides, but a wash of water that moves within, over tens of seconds or minutes. And that's very detrimental to the building foundations.
Between the subsidence of the ground, the rise in water level, the waves from the motorboats, Venice is threatened from all sides. To save the treasures of the city of the Doges, there's only one solution. Drain the canals so as to undertake major works.
They're working on drained sections of the canals about 50 meters long, no more. It's important to know that draining the canals causes subsidence of the geological strata, and this can lead to damage to the nearby palaces. You can never keep a canal dry for more than 3 months.
Today, the town is treated with modern methods. Chemicals are injected in the place of lime mortar to consolidate and rebuild the walls. They prevent the water from seeping into the bricks, and it all has to be done by hand. So even restoring the parapet of this small 18th century bridge takes on unexpected proportions.
How are you going to do it?
I think we'll have to make a cast and create an exact replica that we can give to a specialist.
Everything must be copied perfectly, right down to the finest detail, like this one. Venice is like that. It's demanding. So to make an exact replica, they'll have to call on a specialist who will do the job by hand, using traditional methods. There are no machines to do it. There are no machines specially designed for Venice.
That's why renovations in Venice are more expensive than anywhere else. Today, the town has barely 2 million euros a year to maintain its buildings, whereas 13 million are needed. The water that gave Venetians their glory and their wealth has finally turned against them. Today, 1/3 of the ground floors in the town have become uninhabitable. And the floods, the acque alte, are more and more frequent.
The last 50 years, I would say, the city has experienced really a big increase of the frequency of this high tide. And so if in the past the frequency is really 1 every 10 years, let's say, more or less, now the frequency increased a lot, up to 4 or 5 times per year.
These figures could well turn out to be higher with global warming, which is causing the inexorable rise in sea levels.
Venice's destiny is to be submerged. That's not my prediction. It's foreseen by the people studying maritime and climatic questions.
The prediction that has been done up to the end of this century, they say that the sea level should be rise by, let's say, between 20 and 40, 50, 60 centimeters.
The idea of the city being swallowed up no longer seems a mere fantasy. So a Venetian genius will yet again prove itself with a colossal project to save Venice from ending up at the bottom of the sea like the mythical city of Atlantis. The response of the Italian authorities to prevent Venice being swallowed up is the MOSE project. It's a simple idea. It involves blocking the huge masses of water that come from the sea into the lagoon by the 3 access channels: the Lido Inlet, the Malamocco Inlet, and the Chioggia Inlet. The Italian engineers have dreamed up a system of retractable barriers. In the event of exceptionally high tides, they will be raised to stop the water flowing in. In short, a gigantic plug.
This kind of barrier is unique in the world because it answers to question very unique, because Venice is extraordinary, so Venice is unique and has a unique solution.
The basis of the system consists of gigantic 25,000-ton chambers as big as 7-story buildings. Using custom-built systems, they have been sunk to the beds of the inlets. These concrete giants form the basis of the mobile doors. The MOSE project was launched in 2003 and is now in the final phase of completion. At the Malocco site, about 20 gates are still waiting to be installed. Alberto is the technical team leader.
These are the next gates to be sunk to the bottom.
Steel giants that weigh more than 330 tons. They are of titanic proportions, 28 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 4 meters thick on average. But each of these gates is calibrated and adapted to the seabed.
The Malamocco gates are larger because the seabed is lower, at 14 meters. At Chioggia, it's only 12 meters down. However, the Malamocco gates are 50 centimeters thinner than those at Chioggia, because the Chioggia gates have to resist a much greater pressure of water.
When Alberto gets into one of these gigantic gates, it's as if he were going into the hold of a ship. And yet, this vast space will be filled with water.
When the gates are not in use, this entire space is filled with water. These 4 red tubes carry air from the compressors from the technical unit right at the bottom of the gate. That's what gives the first impetus that raises it.
The air pressure pumped by these tubes pushes the water, which then escapes through special openings. So the door rises and holds back the tide.
If we get a 1.20 meter tide, the barrier will be filled with 1/3 air. If we need to hold back a 1.60 meter tide, or even 3 meters, as has been envisaged, the gate may be filled with air, up to at least 2/3.
Alberto and the engineer's job consists of putting the gates on the tanks. Closely monitored by cameras and a GPS system, the steel giant descends to a depth of over 10 meters as it gradually fills with water. The hinge has to be fitted absolutely perfectly so that it can be permanently fixed. This takes 6 hours of concentration and tension. Every time, it is a real feat. Alberto's men cannot afford to make a mistake. In total, 78 gates will end up on the seabed.
This system has been dimensioned considering a high tide over 3 meters. It means 1 meter more than the exceptional event occurred in 1966. And it has been dimensioned considering also the worst scenario of sea level rise. It means 60 centimeters.
Once the works are completed, the gates will be monitored 24 hours a day by 50 technicians. They will be working in service galleries below water level inside the tanks. MOSE is a magic solution for some and a burden for others. The project polarizes the Italians because the works have dragged on for almost 15 years. The final implementation date has been put back time and time again, and the works have swallowed up the vast sum of 5.5 billion euros. And this cost could still rise.
We don't know if it's going to cost 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion. I mean, we don't even know if they're going to finish it and get it working. But that they don't know either how much they're going to need to spend on keeping it working is very alarming.
The MOSE project must be accompanied by something else. In my opinion, it's inconsistent to want to protect the town against king tides if you don't at the same time maintain it.
As of today, the survival of Venice rests on the MOSE system and the hope that it will prove to be effective. But the retractable barriers won't be able to solve all the problems. They won't stop either the subsidence of the ground nor the maritime traffic. And they won't prevent the slow deterioration of the buildings. Venice's future is looking gloomy.
There are even people who are suggesting that we separate Venice from the lagoon. In my view, it's already pretty radical to separate the lagoon from the sea. But let's do it. Let's turn Venice into a museum. Let's put it in a glass bubble, get rid of all the Venetians, and the problem will be solved.
But fortunately, the Venetian people's imagination knows no limits when it comes to their town. The latest idea is to reflate the subsoil to raise the level of the town. It's a seemingly crazy project dreamed up by researchers at the prestigious University of Padua.
We put 10 wells or 12 wells on a circular shape with a diameter of 10 kilometers, and we inject water into a quite deep aquifer. We select an aquifer system that it is located between 600 and 1,000 meters below the lagoon bottom.
Incredible. Using injections of water to raise a third of the lagoon, a groundbreaking idea never before attempted. These 12 wells would pump 50 liters of salt water per second to swell the sandy subsoil of the lagoon. The researchers are envisaging a progressive elevation of 20 to 25 centimeters in 10 years, that is 2 centimeters a year, resulting in a lowering of the levels in the canals. Unfortunately, this method is not without risk.
You cannot do it in a shorter time. We don't want to generate any fracture, and for this reason we have to inject at a safe rate.
Swelling the subsoil is perhaps the way for Venice to regain the 23 centimeters lost on the seabed. For the moment, this futuristic project is still in a drawer, waiting for finance for the first full-scale tests. In the future, will Venice have to be surrounded by high-tech megastructures in order to keep its head above water? Is that the price to pay so that the generations of centuries to come will be able to admire it? When will we see the next spectacular project that will bring the miracle solution? One thing is certain, no one wants to see this extraordinary town disappearing under the waves. La Serenissima will always be able to count on the enthusiasts who will take up the challenge to save her.